Hey y'all, my name is Vanessa Peters. Thanks for joining us, and you are watching It's Time to Connect.
Vanessa Peters, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to connect. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I know it's been a while that we've been trying to make it happen, and we've tried to coordinate our schedules. And I know you're coming to us from Italy, so we're hoping that the Italy to Texas internet connection holds for us. I don't know. Maybe can go ahead and get into that right away. Can you maybe you're from? Are you from the Dallas area originally?
I am, yep, from
Yeah.
Texas, born and
I know you
raised.
spent some time in Denton up at North Texas. I think you and I figured out we were both English majors
Oh,
in
at
Denton at the same
A&M.
time. Oh, at A&M. That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's yeah, yeah.
I
We were
think
both here.
I think you were in grad school when I was in undergrad. Yeah.
That would make sense. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure why I thought it was Denton, other than the fact that I knew you were from Dallas, and I spent many years, too many years in Denton as an English major, and then I did do my PhD work in the English department here at A&M, and you were here at the same time, though we didn't know each other.
No,
Great
I
to
came across
connect.
your name in my garage the other day when I was going through all this paperwork and we were selling our house, and I was going through boxes, and I had all this stuff from college, which is embarrassing to admit that I was holding on to papers that I'd had for 22 years. But in one of the things was like I think it was called the Gordon Prize does that sound familiar to you?
Something like that, yeah.
The Gordon Prize. I don't know. And it was some sort of thing for like prose and poetry at the undergrad level and the graduate level. And I was in there for the undergrad poetry, and you were in there for graduate. And when I was flipping through it, looking at names, I was like, hey, this is my friend John that I met during COVID,
Do you remember, did I have a poem or two in there, I'm guessing?
I must have been a poem, yeah. I still have it. I mean, it was one of the things that I did not throw away. So, but it's back in storage right now. So
yeah, I should look through some of my old boxes. I may have that too. I don't know about you, but most of those old poems of mine from then have now turned into songs.
Absolutely. I have several from that era that have made it onto records.
Well, tell us, if you will. I mean, this could be a long story. Try to kind of make a summary version of the Vanessa Peters Italy story. How you ended up. You're permanently there now, is that right?
We are actually, as of just a couple of months. We just sold our house in Texas, but it's been a long and winding road that brought us here. The shortest version I can give you is that Texas A&M has a study abroad program over there, and I did it right at the end of my time at university. And I fell in love with the little town that I lived in. I went back after I graduated. I went back and did sort of like a gap year. I was planning to go to grad school, took some time off, and I went back just so I could learn Italian and sort of spend some time abroad. Worked at the university where I had studied. Ended up starting to date somebody over there. Kind of moved over there, formed a band with one of the guys I was dating and a couple other guys, started touring. That was kind of my life for about 10 years, more Italy than Texas, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then when he and I broke up, and when the band broke up and everything kind of, went its separate ways, I went back to Texas and eventually met the man that I'm now married to, my husband. He had never been to Italy, and I took him over there on one of my tours in Europe, and he fell in love with it. And we kind of started plotting and planning how we could make it our home base instead of Dallas. And after about 13 years of a lot of work and a lot of back and forth and all sorts of crazy details I won't go into, now we're here. So yeah. And we have a band over here. I mean, we've had a band over here for several years. In fact, the guys that we did our last 2 or 3 records with are based over here. We brought them to Texas to record in some instances anyway. But yeah.
Well, now didn't you record Modern Age in Italy?
I did. Yeah. Modern Age was supposed to be recorded in Texas. We had time booked in Austin and all this stuff, and the band, the tickets were bought and everything, and that was scheduled for late March 2020. So obviously that didn't happen. Yeah. And we ended up recording it at a farmhouse here. We have a friend who was American who owns a house here, and she was stuck in the States. She couldn't get back to use her house, and so she let us take over her house and turn it into a ad hoc recording studio, and that's where we did the album. So
Well,
we were.
it's the production is great on that record. It's a really good record. I'm sort of can't get Crazy Maker out of my head, and
Good.
really fine record. I also really like the mixtape records. Is that something that you might do again? Do a record of covers?
I do think we will actually. We had the hardest time narrowing it down just to those 10 songs. I mean, we recorded more than 10, and then I had an initial list of about 30 songs that we were trying to pick and choose from. So I'm sure that Mixtape Volume 2 is out there somewhere, because we had a lot of fun doing that too. So.
But you've done 9 or 8 or 9 full-length records, is that right?
Yeah, full length, yeah, and then when you count EPs and stuff, it's, I don't know, we're up to 12 or 13. I'm not sure. I need to go back and count myself.
Wow. How would you say, I know this may not be a fair question, how would you compare Modern Age to Sparkler, that first record in 2003?
Well, let's see. How can we count the ways? I mean, Modern Age is, first, it's a lot more rock. It's a lot more almost grungy. In fact, more rock than anything I've done since, and more rock probably than anything I'll do in the future. It was sort of a bit of an outlier, but in a good way, because I have that vein running through me, I think, just as much as I do folk, country, or anything else. But
there's a little variety there on the record, though. Some more kind of bluesy stuff, for example.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I think anybody that only listened to the first 2 or 3 tracks probably got like one idea what the record would be. And then it definitely morphs as you listen, all the way through it. It's kind of top loaded with the heavier rocker stuff. But Sparkler I didn't even know what I was doing. It was like, oh, I guess I write songs now, and look, let's record them. We'll just figure it out as we go. And it was definitely an off the cuff sort of amateur effort in the best way.
I hope you still have some affection for that record, though, and
I absolutely do.
Good.
For sure.
Good.
I have no disdain for it at all. I look back and I have sort of a tender heart for that sweet girl that had no idea what she was getting into.
I mean, there's certainly a charm to that, and I think you're probably not being fair. I do encourage people who are listening to this. I'll put the Idol Records URL and your own on the show notes so people can check the stuff out. But yeah, I really encourage people who are watching this to check out your music. It's really great. I want to hear a little bit about who you think some of your influences have been songwriting wise, and I'm particularly curious about. I read somewhere, what was it, Dallas Morning News, that called you the Amy Mann of Dallas?
I think so, which is the fair cop in the sense, I mean, I wish, but it's a fair cop in the sense that Amy Mann was definitely one of my songwriting heroes. I mean, I came about songwriting sort of as I always loved to sing. I always loved music, but I never considered myself a musician. I still don't consider myself a musician in the sense of like, I'm rarely going to be the person that sits around the campfire and jumps in to play a lick on my guitar or whatever. Like I consider myself more a writer, a songwriter, and then it just happens to be that I love to sing. And Amy Mann is one of those people that I feel like really starts from she's obviously has a massive musical vocabulary, but she clearly has like a really strong lyrical component to what she does. And that's one of the things that I've always respected about her songs. And that's where I nearly always begin with my lyrics. Every now and then I start with a melody that I have in my head, but usually it starts off with, some like an idea, a construct that I have. And I think that she's definitely one of the people I look up to, and just in terms of being able to balance clever lyrics with really good turns of melody, So
it is a fair comparison for sure.
Yeah.
Who are some of the other folks that you think probably influenced you?
Sarah Harmer, for sure. I don't know if you know who she is. She's not terribly well known in Texas necessarily, but she's from Canada. She's kind of like a precursor to Kathleen Edwards, I guess.
Okay.
She was on the scene a few years before Kathleen Edwards kind of blew up, but I would say that they're kind of cut from the same cloth.
Gotcha.
And she has, a lot of folk elements, but if you listen to her older stuff, she also grew up like clearly playing punk and rock as well, which is one of the things I like, that her records always incorporate 1 or 2 like very pop rock numbers mixed in with a lot of folk things, which is a thing I've always done myself without meaning to. It's like I can never really have like a folk record or a rock record or like everything's always kind of a mishmash, because that's what I love,
Right.
So that comes out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it said by other people, and I know I'm this way myself. I like to make records. I like to make songs that I want to hear.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
and like you, I like a variety of things. So why would it be stuck? Well, who are some of the bands maybe that you don't think of, bands or songwriters that maybe you don't think of as being a big influence on you songwriting, but when you were a kid growing up, who did you listen to? Who are some of the bands you went to see, some memorable shows, that kind of thing?
So, well, it's both. I mean, so I grew up listening to a lot of Billy Joel. My my dad was a big Billy Joel fan, and my parents were divorced, and often my dad would drive up to Dallas to pick us up on the weekends, and we would go back with him, or my mom would drive us halfway, and he would meet us. He lived in East Texas, and so we spent like a lot of Saturdays and Sundays in the cars, coming and going, And I remember my dad always made tapes of his. I guess at the time he had CDs that he was
Yeah.
copying onto cassette tapes that we would listen to in the car. And I can remember certain records that we just listened to a ton, many of which were like early and recent, or like later, Billy Joel and Elton John, that kind of stuff. So I guess now we would call that almost like soft rock. I don't know what you would call it, 70s,
Yeah.
70s singer-songwriter rock blending
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
80s pop rock.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff I still love to listen to today when I'm on car rides. I have no idea if it's seeped into my musical vocabulary, but I have it's hard to see how it couldn't have, given how much of it I listened to it.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing they have in common, and I think Amy Mann is pretty much this way too, and from what I've heard of your music, you're pretty much this way. Um, m- the lyrics tend to tell a story.
Mhm.
They tend to maybe not be, obvious and straight ahead. There's some really interesting turns and some provocative things, but rarely do I hear that. As I've heard said about my friend Will Johnson, I love that song of his, but I have no idea what it's about. I did, the words are
Okay.
great, but I don't even know what they mean. That's Patterson Hood said that
Mhm.
about some of Will's songs. He said, I can sing every word, but I have no idea what they mean. Do you, do you, and that might get us to Bob Dylan, by the way, because that's one topic that I definitely want to bring up with you, because he obviously had straight ahead story songs, and he also had those songs that were more impressionistic. I think after he kind of immersed himself in the French surrealist, you got a lot of that stuff where you're like, man, that sounds really cool, and I suppose we could explicate it in some way, but it's definitely not something. It's something that makes the audience work at to try to figure out what's going on there. How do you feel about all that with respect to your lyric writing?
So this all goes back to, studying creative writing and
Yep.
everything. And I've always been a big fan of the concept that and I think it was Chekhov that said this, that like if you try to write something universal, it's just going to end up cliche. So
Yeah.
what you have to go is write about something that you have to dive into the specific and the personal. And if you can hit the vein of what it is that you're mining for, then it will be something that other people can relate to, even if they don't relate to it quite in the same way that you were hoping that they would or that they intended. So a lot of the songs that I've written, I feel like I tried to tell a story, but I left it intentionally, like, changed details or kind of removed things that might have kicked a listener out of it and left it a little bit more open to their interpretation of it. For example, a song of mine that's an older song called Little Films, that was about a relationship that I had that went south. And several people have told me that, like, one person said, oh, that reminds me of, like the relationship I had with my dad when he left our family, and like things that I was not even remotely thinking of when I wrote it. But I go back and I listen to it and I'm like, oh yeah, I could hear how that could be your interpretation out of it. And so I aim for that. Like, I don't want to preach to anybody. I don't want to tell you what my song is about. Very rarely do I come right out and just say, hey, this is this song and it's about this. I like to sort of like set the stage of how I wrote it, but then let everybody find their space within it. If that makes sense.
Let me back up and ask you a couple of maybe challenging questions. One would be, other than just saying I'm a singer-songwriter, I'm a musician, how do you describe yourself? Who other than just the surface level, oh, I'm a American expat living in Italy and I'm a singer-songwriter. I mean, and we all know that, but who are you? How do you think? How do you describe yourself? How do you think of yourself?
I am a overachiever, a perfectionist, a multitasker, um, a sensitive soul who who tries really hard not to step on other people's feelings, and then often feel like I get my own stepped on because I give a little too much sometimes without setting proper boundaries, maybe. I care way too much about like things that I can't control sometimes, you know,
Such as
and
politics?
such as politics, such as, you know, whether or not the person in front of me recycled the plastic bottle of water they were just drinking out of or whatever. Like I could absolutely learn to relax and let go
Yeah.
of some things. And I know this about myself. It's, you know,
Yeah.
it's an
Excellent.
ongoing.
Really good answer. Good self-awareness there. A lot of people kind of stumble on that question, but you clearly know yourself well.
I know all my faults. I just haven't figured out how to address them yet.
Yeah, but it's, knowing that is good, and everything you named, I personally would rather err on the side you're erring on.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe you could modify a little bit, but I think you're on a pretty good track there. Well, speaking of politics,
Ah,
we could really go down that road, and we probably shouldn't.
like, could
But
we?
let me just ask it this way, kind of a roundabout way. How is living in Italy different than living in the US? Maybe that doesn't have to touch politics, but it probably will one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million ways that it's different. In a political sense, it's interesting because this is a country that has a parliamentary representation where there's, instead of just two parties, there's like 22 parties, however many there are, the kind of the opposite end of the insanity spectrum. But what it does mean is that a lot of times I see people that don't tend to agree with each other politically speaking, that can still manage to have a conversation with each other
Well,
because
we
they
could use that here.
yeah, because they're not, it's not so black and white. We actually, in the town I live in, just had elections for mayor on Sunday, and it's going to a runoff. There wasn't a clear winner, but there were 7 different candidates running for mayor, under like 10 different parties. That don't even ask me how that works at first. I'm still trying to figure all that out. But it was really interesting to me just to talk to a few of my local friends that had clear ideas about this candidate being like a good person, even though maybe they were not like, I've kind of come to the point, and this is a thing I probably need to get past myself. It's like, if I don't agree with a person's perspective, a lot of times it's really hard for me not to just assume that they suck. Like, I know that they don't, but I've become really hardened about like, these people are ruining everything, you know? And I feel like that is still a lot more gray here. There's a lot more tolerance for like, well, this person believes this, but on the other hand, I've seen them do X, Y, and Z, and so they're not all bad or they're not all good, you know? And I appreciate that, and I think it's a thing that we could absolutely learn from. I don't know how to fix the entrenched two-party system. I don't actually think that it can be fixed in our current political climate, but that's a different Zoom conversation probably.
About the social media insanity, and how does that's working over there? I mean, it's become cliche, but here it's the old story of everyone can find confirmation of the wildest opinion that they might have, and find plenty of people online who agree with them, and so they end up speaking and thinking in these silos, and that's one of the reasons we can't seem to speak across party lines and political and philosophical lines. But also, it's just, I don't know about you, but one of the things social media has done for me is just really, I think I always knew this, to really point out so obviously just how most people lack critical thinking skills. It's just amazing.
For sure.
It's
For sure.
amazing. What's it like in Italy in terms of social media impact?
I mean, I think it's probably as diffuse of a problem here as it is there. I honestly, like midway through COVID, I pretty much got off of Facebook. I removed it from my phone, and I can't really remove it entirely because I manage you have
Yeah.
to keep a personal page. For those of you listening at home, you have to keep a personal page in order to manage your band page.
Uh-huh.
And so, and I mean, it would be career suicide at this point to delete my band page.
Yes.
You know, I already have a hard enough time getting people to know who I am. Why would I delete one of the
Right.
main avenues for people to find me?
But thank you, by the way, for playing on my Facebook live
yes,
stream last year. Yeah.
Yes, it was fun, and I'm glad that I got a chance to do it. And that is, for example, one of the great reasons to keep social media alive,
Yes.
because it allows us these sorts of interactions. But um, so to that end, it's a little hard, I guess, for me to say what the political climate is like in Italy on social media, because I pretty much removed it from my phone. And on Instagram, I tend to just post. I try really hard not to get political, although if you follow me, you hang out in my stories, you'll see it,
Yeah.
But again, I feel like that tolerance for other people's opinion, for better or for worse, because sometimes I feel like, there are certain things you shouldn't be tolerant of.
Yeah.
But I do feel like the tolerance for other people's opinion is still, at the end of the day, a thing that is prevalent here. And so social media does have a little bit less rancor, at
Yeah.
least in the circles that I follow,
Yeah. How is it different touring and playing live there in Italy and maybe in Europe in general, if you are you, and also I'm curious how it's, we've a lot of people here seem to think COVID's done, and it's kind of making I think it's making another little surge, and who knows what the future is going to be. But for the most part, we have opened up with respect to playing gigs, and some gigs require masks for everybody. Some gigs require proof of vaccination. Some gigs are just wide open. What's that climate like in Italy?
So it's funny because Italy all along has been stricter than the US by and large.
Yes.
But now it is not any longer.
Okay.
There was, I think maybe because they were so strict for so long, towards the end of this last wave with Omicron, tons of people, just like in the States, tons of people got it, and already had their boosters and everything else. And by then, I think there was the sort of the perception of like, look, enough people have been triple vaxxed and or have also had it, that like we have a lot of herd immunity, and so it's time to finally start opening up. Also because Italy's economy, like many countries, is just severely dependent on tourism, and these last 2 years have been a complete gut punch for hotels and restaurants and tour drivers and all sorts of people that clean apartments, or the farmers that furnish the restaurants, whatever. It's been like across the whole economy. And so basically starting around Easter, they rolled out a plan saying we're going to start decreasing as long as the cases stay low, which they had, because at that point everybody had COVID, I think. And so, they said we're going to start lifting this requirement, blah, blah. And I think on June 10th or 15th, maybe even today, the 15th, it was like a couple days ago, they finally lifted the last of the requirements as far as masks. I think the only thing that may still be required is masks on public transport.
Well, and hospitals,
but otherwise it's pretty much open. Yeah. Sorry, obviously hospitals and like rest homes and that kind of stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
But
I should not fail to give our mutual friend Irv at Idle Records credit for this question. Irv, I was talking to Irv and telling him that I was going to talk to you, and he said, you might ask her, not so much with respect to COVID, but what is it? How is it differing? How does it differ playing live shows in Italy and Europe in general to the US? Is there a market difference? Is it something that even a good question for you to respond to?
it's a market difference, at least at my level. I don't know if maybe when somebody gets to a level where they're playing, 1,000-seat theaters or whatever, maybe it's no different for them. But for me, playing small clubs here, I generally have better turnout because I think people are still sort of just intrigued by the idea that I'm from so far away. I also speak Italian, which helps because I'm able to really interact with the audience. But that's also true in Germany and the Netherlands and places where English is prevalent. I still feel like I get a good turnout because people are curious. And I think they're actually, in many cases, appreciative that you've traveled so far. Silly things like in the States, a lot of small venues either don't have a restaurant and or don't have the budget to provide food. But here it would be like shameful for them to not provide food, even if they didn't have the budget. Like I've played venues where the local grandmother came and like brought a pre-prepared meal from her house, So it's like, I think they go a long way towards trying to be very hospitable and make sure that the artist feels very welcome. And that's actually true it's not just, they don't do that for me because I'm American. Like that's also true for my other Italian band friends and stuff as well. But I do feel like there's a lot of respect for what we do. And I feel like the audiences really do listen and try to try to follow along, which I appreciate tremendously since I am a songwriter, since I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
So
Nice. Yeah, I've heard that from other people that that they wish that U.S. audiences and gigs were more similar to what they encounter in Europe. Um, let's see. What are there bands, songwriters in Italy that's frustrating you now that you are immersed over there that people in the U.S. don't know about? Got to be somebody over there. You're thinking, oh man, this woman would be great in the U.S., but they have no idea who he or she is.
all the Italian bands that I love sing in Italian. So
Really?
I don't
Okay.
even have that perspective because I figured they would never have a shot of really getting a toehold over there,
Okay.
Like there are several bands I can think of that I love, but none of them sing in English, weirdly.
Okay.
Yeah.
As an ex-English major, are you still an avid reader? Do you read a lot?
I do, and I am. I fell into a bit of a trap maybe 3 or 4 years ago, after the last election, not this one, but the previous one, 2016. I, like many people, was looking for comfort, and I'm the sort of person, like, I used to love to watch sad movies, and I used to love to read like really heavy books, and I didn't mind like weeping at the end of a 3-hour film or closing a book and just sobbing and like, "Oh." And I reached a point in my life where like I just couldn't handle that level of emotional pathos anymore. I just needed something a little bit easier. And I've always been a fan of detective novels. So I definitely a couple years ago fell down a rabbit hole of I would get on my Kindle and I would go to the library because there's those apps where you can get stuff from your local library back home. And I would just like check out library books that were detective novels. So I think for like 3 years straight, I've been reading mostly detective novels, which is kind of embarrassing. But it's a way for me to unwind,
Yeah.
And then every so often I feed in a real novel and I'm like, oh, I love that. Okay, now I need to not read anymore for 6 months. Like I think the last book that I read that was what I would call a literary fiction was A Gentleman in Moscow.
Okay.
Which is a beautiful book that I loved it. I read it and I closed it and I was like, man, I could start that over right now. It was just beautifully, beautifully written. Fitzgerald is a big, like I'm a huge F. Scott Fitzgerald fan, and it reminded me a lot of a
Okay.
kind of modern spin on a Fitzgerald book. Just
Okay.
loved it.
A
And then
Gentleman in Moscow.
yes,
Okay.
it's just wonderful. And then after that, I went straight back into detective fiction.
Right on.
For
One
now.
of the things I too went through a period where it just almost became hard to read, probably for different reasons. I probably am more of a victim I've allowed myself to be more of a victim of the of social media and just the immediate culture benefit kind of society we live in. I mean, I used to be just like you, I'm sure. I was that guy when I was young that would read and forget to eat because I was lost in a book. And these days I have to really push myself to sit down and read for more than 20 or 30 minutes. But another thing that's affected that I think is good and bad is audiobooks and podcasts, and there's just so much out there now. It's easier to access. And for example, one of my absolute favorite authors, I'd be surprised if you don't love him too, is David Sedaris.
Mm-hmm.
And I would so much rather listen to David Sedaris reading his book than it's so much a much more rewarding experience than for me to sit down and read his book. So a lot has changed with respect to this reading life that we both used to be so immersed in.
Yeah, I mean, I still love a book, like
Yeah.
an actual book, but I have to say that with the life that I live, it isn't really very reasonable for me to
Yeah.
keep up with books anymore.
Yeah.
And once I got away from like the physical copy of a book, I also feel like that maybe changed my reading taste.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things I did a TED talk about this years ago about like music in the digital age and the pluses, but mostly the minuses of it. And I think the same thing that drives me to read what I will call like cheap detective novels, but that isn't even true because a lot of them have a lot of literary value, but they're never going to be on a English lit syllabus,
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the things that drive me towards reading fun, easy to digest detective novels are the same things that lead people to stream background music without thinking about it, as opposed to buying an album and sitting down and really concentrating and listening and reading the lyrics.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, those two things go hand in hand. And so I too am a culprit, I suppose, in this
Yeah.
culture
Yeah.
war.
You know, you've answered a lot of my questions. One of my questions is going to be, what are your guilty pleasures? And you sort of answered that one. I was going to ask you what pisses you off, and you kind of answered that one already.
I cheated because I watched so many of your podcasts
Oh, no,
earlier.
that's great. That's
Some of-
great. Now, Dylan's name has come up a little bit, and we don't have to spend much time on this, but because he's an obsession of mine, and I ask all my guests, how do you
Mhm.
think of Dylan, just in terms of, influence on you, influence on the culture? Just how do you think of him now? And then the other question I have for people, songwriters, is if Bob showed up at your door right now and said, "Hey, Vanessa, I hear you're a songwriter. What song of yours would you sing for Bob?"
Oh gosh, what song of mine? Wow. Woo, that's tough. That was also a multi-part question. Let's see. So I came to Bob kind of late, because I had a hard time getting past Bob's voice, I'm not gonna lie. When I first was introduced to him, I was sort of like, yeah, but listen to this guy sing. So it took a little while before I could appreciate it, but now
I
I do.
understand. Yeah.
In fact, one of the first covers I learned was Boots of Spanish Leather a long time ago. I
Yeah.
couldn't play it now, probably. I'm gonna have to go look it up again, um, but yeah, no, I completely appreciate him as a songwriter now. I came to a lot of those songwriters, I think, kind of late, like Joni Mitchell, and that whole world was, like I said, I grew up kind of listening to 80s soft rock pop stuff. Like I didn't really delve into what we would call real singer-songwriters until I picked up a guitar and started learning to play, and then I kind of went back and was like, oh, there's this whole world that I almost missed out on.
Yeah.
But gosh, what song would I play for Bob? Maybe I'd be brave and playing one of my new ones that's going to be
Yeah.
on the new one. But
Most of my guests say one of my brand new ones, because I would be so nervous. I want to make sure it's a song that I
right,
it's on top of my head. I can.
You
Yeah.
know what? I think I would play him just one of them from Foxhole Prayers.
Okay.
I would like to hope that he would appreciate the musical and lyrical value of that song, because I think
Right on.
it's a good one. So
Cool. Well, let's see. Do you have any, you mentioned some of the stuff that kind of pisses you off, like people not recycling and politics and I mentioned the lack of critical thinking that we seem to encounter a lot, but do you have any kind of method or any kind of do you meditate? Do you have any kind of way that you deal with these slings and arrows?
man, I'm just being very honest with you this evening. No, I don't, and that's one of my other faults for sure. I know this about myself. I go on walks with a good friend of mine who's a yoga teacher, and she's like very zen and very good about meditating. And she's always telling me, she's like, "Have you tried this app? I could send you this thing you could download." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't have time for that." She's like, "That's kind of the whole point, is you have to make time for it, because
Yes.
otherwise it's going to eat you alive." Perfectly aware of this, but no, this is a thing I'm still trying to work towards. But I will say that part of the reason that I love being here, as opposed to the States, is my life here, even though it's quite busy and I have a day job and I'm burning the candle at both ends here just as much as I am there. I feel like when I am not working, I am able to relax more fully. And I feel like there are some benefits just in the simple fact that I live in a city where I walk everywhere. Or ride my bike if it's something really far away. And so at the very least, I have these moments of physical activity where I get up from the computer and I'm like, oh shoot, I got to go get groceries. But instead of getting in the car and getting in traffic and getting angry and like whatever, I walk for 10 minutes and I run into people that I recognize on the street and I stop and have a conversation with them. And I feel like that in and of itself is, if not a form of meditation, it's a form of reset that I'm afforded, that I recognize I'm very lucky to have, because I notice when I don't have it. Like I notice when I'm back in Texas and I don't have that for a while and I just get kind of bunched up, and it's kind of a way just to, I'm human again. I step away from what I have to get done,
Yeah, that's great that you have that. Yeah. I won't preach to you, but as a meditation teacher myself, let me just add to
I didn't know.
and let me just say that I personally feel like it's a misnomer when people say I don't have time to meditate,
It totally is.
because really, and I mean that literally in this sense, you could benefit from as little as 10 minutes a day. And it's not like you're carving 10 minutes out where you could be doing something else. The reality is, if you get into a practice, that 10 minutes will benefit you so much that you'll have more free time for the rest of the time. It will make you more focused.
Productive.
It'll
Mhm.
make you more, it will help you prioritize your time better. So that's end of commercial there. What are
Well, I
you
know, you're
what are
right.
you most proud of?
Oh, wow. Um, I'm proud of the fact that I'm where I am. I'm not gonna say without anybody's help, because I've had tons of like Kickstarters, and my husband is a recording engineer and he's helped me make amazing records and whatever else. But I think a lot of people hear the words like, oh, you live in Italy and you play music, whatever, whatever, and they just assume that like I'm probably a trust fund kid or something.
Mhm.
And in reality, like I worked 4 jobs in college just to pay for my study abroad experience, and I worked my ass off like 9 months of the year every year just so that I could spend the summers in Italy working on the language and stuff. And I'm proud of the fact that I have no Italian heritage. I have no citizenship thing to lean on, and yet I was able to get my way to the equivalent of a green card, and I'm here. And I did it just because it was a thing that was really important to me,
Yeah,
and it was, it wasn't one of those things that like I built this myself. I'm not ignorant enough to think that I didn't have help, but I definitely, it was a thing I made happen because I really wanted it to happen. And I'm proud of that.
that
And the
really
same thing for my music career as well, to be honest.
mhm. That really resonates with me. I don't obviously I don't know you well, but the little bit of time I've spent with you, you do um, seem to me to be someone who uh, you've earned it. You're a hard worker. I can tell. You don't jack around. You get to it. You do it, and you have your priorities straight. So good for you. Um, what do you want people to know about you? If there's, just in general, other than what we've talked about, and I've just got a couple more things before we wind up. What do you want people to know about you,
Um,
other than maybe what you just said, which is would be a pretty good answer? Anything else come to mind?
I mean, I would like to think that people that, that my friends or family would say that I'm a caring person that looks out for those around me, and that I, I sincerely doubt I always succeed, but I do try to think of other people before myself. I make an honest effort to assess other people's needs before my own sometimes. Um,
Perhaps to
and
a fault.
maybe to a fault. And I, maybe it's weird to say it, but I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty good songwriter, and I wish more people knew that.
Yes.
That's a
Well,
weird
I
thing to
think
say, but
I think they will. I think it's you've been doing this for almost 20 years. And I'm assuming in terms of your listenership and your fan base, it's probably been a steady increase. But you're working on a new record.
mhm.
I don't want to end the conversation before we mention that. Anything you want to say about the new record?
Just we're super excited about it. We started it in January before we sold our house in Texas. We actually were able to fly the whole band over from Italy. We were able to reuse our tickets that we were supposed to use for Modern Age. We put them on ice and we used them just before they expired. So the band came over to Texas and we did all the groundwork, pretty much everything except for my vocals, in fact. And then when they
Where'd you
flew
record it?
at our old studio. So we had a studio at our house that we sold, and so we dismantled the studio, and basically we recorded the ground, the foundation, and then we put the house on the market, sold the house, had to dismantle the studio. So we got pretty much to the point of recording my vocals and some of my acoustic guitars. But then we put it all away, and we just took it out maybe like 10 days ago. My husband finally was able to get, Pro Tools up and running here in our studio and everything. And we're just about ready to do vocals. So that's very exciting because
Right on. Is that
it's
going to
nice
be
to hear
another
it again.
Idle Records release?
I hope so. I have to talk to Herb, but
And what's your hope for when that gets released?
well, let's see. Today's June 15th. Gosh, it would be a miracle if it was this year. I wish it could be
Okay.
this year, but I bet it'll be at the maybe
Hopefully
December.
late this year, if not early next year. Okay,
Yeah.
well, if you watched a couple of the other episodes of Time to Connect, I always ask people these deep questions at the end. What do you think happens when we die?
I go back and forth on this, but I currently think not a lot happens. I mean, I think that we close our eyes and that's that. But ask me again next week. I'll let you know based on how I'm feeling. But it doesn't make me sad. It doesn't make me feel fatalistic, or I just feel like, there's that casual end. And then
Yeah.
maybe we show up somewhere else later. I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling about that yet.
And you're okay with not knowing?
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. I don't see how I could possibly, how can you know? You can't know.
And you kind of answered this question already, but I'm going to give you a chance to answer it again if you want to, related to that. When you are dead and gone, what is it that you hope people say about you?
That I was kind.
Yeah.
It's very simple. My mom is a very kind person, and I think she really instilled that in me. And I realize it more and more as I get older, how lucky I was to have really kind parents. And I definitely want that to be a thing that I pay forward to other people. So
That's great. That's great. So, Vanessa, you agreed to do a song for us, and I really appreciate that. So why don't you grab your guitar, and hopefully the Italy to Texas internet is going to hold up here. And yeah, tell us what you're going to play. I'm looking forward to this.
So this is a song called Never Really Gone, and it's from my last record, Modern Age. It's a little bit about being stuck between the two worlds of Texas and Italy, so it seems appropriate to play it tonight. It feels good to push the bruise and realize it's gone. It's just skin, there's nothing bleeding underneath, nothing damaged or torn. And I don't trust it yet, but I stuck a toe out on the ice. Maybe coming back didn't make it cry. It's clear in hindsight that I was never really gone. I carried it inside, always afraid to lose what I had. I came back to find that I was never really gone. I'll never forget the fortune that brought me on this path. All the people I'd have never got to know if I'd let fear turn me back. And I left some songs along the road. I traveled from here to there and back again and again and again. Maybe I left home, but in the end I was never really gone. I carried it inside, always afraid to lose what I had. I came back to find that I was never really gone. And maybe I outgrew this place, or maybe I just thought I did. And maybe I just needed to spread my wings and fly around a little bit, 'cause I was never really gone. I carried it inside, always afraid to lose what I had. I came back to find that I was never really gone, never really gone, never really gone.
Beautiful, beautiful. It's a really interesting twist on a theme that I have written about a lot, which is you can't go home again.
Yep.
This is sort of flipping that on its head. That's nice. It's really
Yeah.
nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much again for taking the time to connect.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
really enjoyed the conversation, and big fan of yours. I'm looking forward to the new record. People who have not heard the Modern Age record, you need to listen to it. And as I said, I'll put the links in the show notes. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.